It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there.
Good evening, everybody. You're watching America First. My name is Nicholas J. Fuentes. We have a great show for you tonight. Very excited to be back here with you tonight on Wednesday. We have a lot to talk about tonight. Lots to get into. Big show. Our featured story tonight, we're talking all about the full assault on the ADL, which, honestly, I have some mixed feelings about. I know that might sound surprising, but I'll tell you why I feel that way. Major breakthrough and development. First, the ADL received a ton of pushback and public pressure because they listed on their glossary of hate groups and individuals. This is a feature on their website where they catalog who they consider to be racists, anti-Semites, white supremacists, and other categories of extremists. They had listed on the website Turning Point USA, as well as a faction of Christian identitarians, or a so-called Christian identity movement. And a lot of people said, is this not the type of vilification of conservatives which led to the assassination of Charlie Kirk and all these attacks on Christian churches, which we've seen over the past few years especially? That was the first big push. So they took down the glossary of hate, and then almost immediately afterward, the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, announced that the FBI would no longer work in collaboration with the ADL, which is a huge deal because the ADL has collaborated with the FBI for something like 80 years. And a lot of people said this is an amazing development, and I agree. This is a truly remarkable, a notable and remarkable development. And I would say it is unambiguously positive. The ADL is a massive, oppressive force that works on behalf of Israel, that works on behalf of the transnational Jewish community. And it seems that their primary activity is the reputational destruction of anybody that criticizes Jews or Israel. And it goes further than that. They not only work to destroy the reputation of the perceived enemies of Israel and the Jewish people, but also anyone they consider to be insufficiently guilty for being white, anybody that is too proud or chauvinistic about being a Christian. They engage in reputational destruction, targeted career destruction, and censorship. Maybe most notoriously, they are responsible not only for the data that informs legislation and government action that leads to censorship, but they also actually design the censorship policies and even the software themselves. When Facebook, YouTube, formerly Twitter, when they were banning people, often they were banning people on the ADL's recommendation using ADL-designed trust and safety guidelines, and in some cases even using ADL software to flag the posts or users that the ADL wanted banned. So this is huge that the ADL is losing a lot of power. But as I said, I have some mixed feelings about it because there are certain people who you might be surprised to find out are celebrating this alongside us, and they're not our friends. It's people like Ben Shapiro. It's groups like the Zionist Organization of America, Beitar USA, among others. And one way to look at this is as a victory for the Israel-critical right wing, or left wing for that matter, but in particular the right wing. Another way to look at this, another lens, is that this might represent Jewish infighting. Infighting between Jewish groups within the international Jewish community, representing different factions of Jewish interests. And we'll flesh that out in great detail tonight, as we are always reminded, Jews are not a monolith. They don't all think the same way. They don't all act the same way. There is a Jewish right and a Jewish left. There are Jews in Israel. There are Jews in the diaspora in America and Europe. And they don't all agree. They don't all agree on everyday matters. They also don't all agree even on matters pertaining to their own community and to their own interests, for that matter. The major pushback on the ADL seems to be representative of a broader shift that is taking place within the Jewish community. And I think there's benefits for us, but we should be cautious about what this really means. I think it's a good thing for us, unambiguously, but the question is, who will now fill that void? Who may have already filled that void? That's a pertinent question. So we'll talk all about that. That'll be our main story. Finally, tonight, we are going to get to the Gaza peace plan. I know we've been putting it off. It was announced on Monday. We were going to talk about it Monday night. We were going to talk about it yesterday, but we just keep running out of time. There's too much going on this week, but I think tonight we're finally going to get into it, and we'll talk about the specifics of the deal. We'll talk about how, as always, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, has sabotaged and undermined the peace process yet again. The president really thought this was the one. This is the deal that is going to finally bring an end to the conflict. And at the last minute, Netanyahu insisted on some modifications to the deal, potentially poison pilling the deal. In other words, making it so that Hamas would not accept it, and then therefore prolonging the war for another indefinite amount of time. I think that's exactly what happened on Monday, and we'll talk about that as well. Should be a pretty good show. It's good to be back with you guys. Before we get into it, I want to remind you to smash the follow button on Rumble, smash the like button, leave a comment. Let me know what you think about the show. Make sure to get your hats. Holiday season is coming up. Fuentes.store, get your America First hats. They make great gifts. You're going to want to get all three, blue, black, camo. You're going to need these, okay? Because when we go out and deploy in the midterms, when we deploy in 28, we got to have the Groypers wearing the hats. So check them out, Fuentes.store. Subscribe at AmericaFirst.plus to get access to my archive, every piece of content I've ever done. I was talking to some friends of mine the other day. I've been broadcasting for literally 10 years. It's almost 10 years to the date. I think it's or to the day. It's in November. 10 years ago in November is when I started my high school TV show on my high school TV station. And it was the first show I ever did, and that would later become this show. That show, as well as every episode I've ever done, is on AmericaFirst.plus for $15 a month. $100 a month club, you get that, and you get to talk to me in a group chat, which I was active in today, giving a preview about the show. If you're interested, AmericaFirst.plus, check it out. All right, what else? One other thing before we get into the show, just a couple of things before we get into the news. I want to talk a little bit about Tucker Carlson's latest show, which I found very interesting. And I didn't watch the entire thing. But today, Tucker Carlson released an interview with Jeffrey Sachs, who is a liberal Jew and a major critic of Israel. And Tucker weighed in on this phenomenon, which we have been calling the Great Awakening, the Great Red Pilling, whatever you want to say. And he did this lengthy introduction, which he posted in full as a separate video on his channel, where he talks about how America and Israel can rebalance their relationship. And he goes through some of the basic facts, a lot of the things we talked about last night. He talked about how Israel is really an insignificant nation, and that makes it conspicuous why the United States has done so much for them. He says that given that we do so much for such an insignificant country, they need to act differently than how they're treating us. They're insignificant. We pour aid and support. We're the lifeline for this country. And not only are they not grateful, but they actually humiliate us. They act like they control us. Netanyahu is bragging that he controls the president. He says, and what's more, in America in particular, we have a Christian theology that makes us overlook these facts, because many Protestant Christians believe literally that Israel can do nothing wrong. There's a religious conviction based on what they perceive to be revelation that we have to do everything Israel says. And so he lays this out very thoroughly and factually and in a compelling way. And I thought it was brilliant. And I said as much on Twitter. I said, this is excellent. But I found it a little bit problematic, some of the things he said later in the show, just to kind of flesh it out. During this 30-minute introduction, he also says that it is one thing to criticize the government of Israel. He said it's another thing to say that this has anything to do with Jews as a group. He said, if you think this has anything to do with Judaism or Jews as such, he said, you are a David Duke level anti-Semite. You are crazy. You are hateful. You are a bigot. And not only that, he said, but probably you are being backed by a foreign country to hurt America. And there's sort of like 2 points there. There's an intellectual point, which is you can criticize Israel, that's legitimate, but connecting the relationship or dynamic with Israel to Judaism or the Jewish community in itself, he said that's illegitimate. He said, and not only is it illegitimate, but if you're doing that, you're a bad person. You're evil, you're hateful, you're insane, you're not rational, and probably you're not even organic. That's being promoted by America's adversaries. And I didn't like that. I thought that was a bad statement because I think there is a lot of, I pointed this out a couple weeks ago. There is a lot of so-called low IQ anti-Semitism online. People that anything negative about Jews, whether true or false, they will amplify it. And they don't really know what they're talking about, and they don't really discern anything. There is a strain of that. And there are people, we all know, they just go on Twitter and just say, fuck Israel every day. And it's like, I don't know how helpful that really is without bringing the facts, without bringing an argument. That maybe goes into the realm of being a little pathological. But I don't think that everybody that's doing that is a hateful person or a foreign operative. I don't think they're crazy. I think that this is a topic that has been suppressed forever and vigorously suppressed. Like for many years, if you expressed any doubt or any alternative opinion about any of it, Israel, the Holocaust, the Jews, the media, any of this, they ruined your life. In many ways, it's still like this. It's still like this. And one, that inherently breeds suspicion. And two, it makes it very difficult for people to discern what's real and what's fake. Because if every criticism, every like Israel critical or skeptical or Jewish critical or skeptical word, if all of that is called anti-Semitism and the information is censored and suppressed, then how does an ordinary person find reputable information? Ordinary people, average IQ, who are not political experts, maybe don't have deep background on any of these subjects, they're on an intellectual journey to discover the truth. And they don't know who to trust, and they don't know what's real and what's fake, and they're trying to learn. They're trying to figure it out. And so ordinary people that maybe don't have degrees and maybe aren't news broadcasters and aren't in bed with the CIA, or their dad didn't run the CIA, they've never been to Afghanistan or Cambodia or whatever, they're just trying to figure out what's up. And many of them are on the right track, and many of them are trying to find the language or discern what's real and what's fake. We're all kind of doing that. And to sort of cast aspersions on that and say, well, those people are David Duke. First of all, I don't even agree necessarily with the vilification of David Duke. And I don't know why we need to use that kind of language even. Let's just characterize it as what it is. Let's just say we don't want cruelty. We don't want hatred. We want the truth. I'm okay with that. But to say that certain questions are insane or hateful or foreign funded, I don't like that. And then the second thing he said in the interview with Jeffrey Sachs in the second part, Jeffrey Sachs said this has nothing to do with the race of Jewish people. This is only about the state of Israel. And Tucker agreed and said, yes, we must de-racialize the conversation and de-escalate. This is about the state of Israel. And you see this over and over and over again. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene, she says the same thing. She keeps saying the secular state of Israel, the secular state of Israel. Why do they keep saying that? Why did they explicitly say de-racialize? Because they are insistent on divorcing our criticisms of Israel with the criticism of the Jewish nation. And I don't agree with that. Israel, and I'll say it today, I said it earlier this week, I've said it my entire life, or my entire career for the most part. Israel is not like every other country. They're not like any other country. They are unique. And our relationship with them is unique. And our relationship with the Jews is unique. And Jews are unique. I'm a Christian. I'm a Catholic, actually. And if you are a Christian, you do believe that Jews are unique. In a sense, they were God's elected tribe and nation at one point in time, although no longer. And so their identity, their relationship with Revelation, it is unique. They are a remarkable or exceptional people in the sense they are an exception. The fact that they have people all over the world, powerful people, but also they have this country based on this blood and soil nationalism, based on their ethno-religion, all of this is unique. There's no other group in America like the Jews. There's no other country with a relationship to America like Israel. It's just not honest to compartmentalize these things and say, you've got Israel and you've got America. No, you don't. You've got Jews and everybody else. You have American Jews that have a special loyalty or attachment to Israel because they are Jewish. And Israel is the Jewish state. And this is such a persistent connection because of the power and the strength, and in some sense, the enduring truth of the Jewish identity and the Jewish story. There's no other group that is unassimilable like Jews are. Every other group on some level assimilates with a greater degree than the Jews do. The Jews didn't have a state for 2,000 years, and they never assimilated. Do American blacks have any connection to Africa? No. There are third or fourth generation Hispanics like me that have no connection to Mexico. Italians that have no connection to Italy. Russians that have no connection to Russia. It goes on and on. American whites that have no connection to England. Yet Jews never assimilated. And they're here, and they have this enduring loyalty to their nationhood, to this foreign country that is unique. And the basis of that unique relationship, or I should say it this way, that unique relationship is the basis of America's relationship with Israel and many of these problems, many of these issues that he raised on the show. And that is clearly the truth. And so I don't know why he continues to insist this is about decoupling the American state and the Israeli state. It cannot be done because the American society is infiltrated by Jews loyal to Israel, and they were born here and they speak perfect English without an accent. Many of them, some of them still have an accent. Many of them aren't even religious. Like Larry Ellison. Larry Ellison is not a religious Jew. He was born in America. He was adopted by Jews in Chicago. And yet, he's got a special friendship and relationship with Israel. He's the second richest man in the world, and he's manipulating our country on Israel's behalf. How does that fit neatly into this idea that it's about the Israeli government and nothing else and American society? It doesn't fit, and it doesn't make any sense, and I don't like that they're insisting on something that isn't true, And they will never debate this. I would love to talk to Tucker about this. I'd love to talk to any of these people about this. And it's also weird that Candace Owens insisted upon the same thing. When she finally invited me on her show in June, I just found this interesting. She raised the same exact issue. She said it's got nothing to do with being born Jewish. It's got everything to do with whether you're a Zionist. And I said, that's just not true. It's demonstrably not true. And she and Tucker are the two most influential conservative figures right now in the mainstream. And they're both perceived as Israel's worst enemies, but they're also both pushing this calculated line. So that is an intellectual disagreement. And I wouldn't even frame it as a disagreement. They're either ignorant or they're lying, because what they're saying is not true. And people need to understand this to understand the scope and the depth of the problem here. And we raised this in the debate with Dinesh D'Souza. A lot of people say, Tucker proposed this. He said, we should register AIPAC as foreign agents. He said, we should get rid of all the dual citizens in America. Okay. Excuse me for that burp there. He says, we should register AIPAC under FARA. We should expel the dual citizens. What do you do about the American Jews that do not have dual citizenship that are still loyal to Israel? How do you explain that? You've got Jews that are born in America. They're 100% Jew. They're proud Jew. They don't have another citizenship. They can't be registered under FARA because they're not being paid directly by Israel. But yet they only care about Israel. What do you do with them? How do you fit that into your explanation? How do you fit that into your narrative? It doesn't fit. It doesn't work. It has everything to do with that. It's got everything to do with Christians and Jews, Rome and Israel. It always has had everything to do with that. Anyway, so I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I just found that interesting because he led the show by saying, we all need to stop being obsessed with Israel. We all need to stop talking about Israel so much. That's not healthy. Well, we'll stop talking about Israel when they stop running our affairs. Isn't that a kind of a good rule of thumb? How could we reasonably stop talking about Israel when we're paying for their genocide and it's hurting us, when we're being dragged into their war with Iran, when their oligarchs are buying our social media, when their operatives are taking over our Ivy League universities? Everywhere you look, there it is. Everywhere you look, there they are, meddling in our affairs, influencing our society. So if that were no longer the case, we would have no reason to talk about it. If there was some other external force or an internal force that was directing our affairs, we could or would talk about that. But it's this. It's just this, it seems. Or at the minimum, this seems to be the most powerful external force being exerted on our country. So I don't like that he said in itself, well, it's not good that we're all talking about Israel so much. Yeah, I don't agree. I think that we sort of have to. We've been forced to. Believe you me, it's sort of ironic, and I'll just say this briefly, then we have to move on. When I got started doing my show in 2017, I didn't start out only or mostly talking about Israel or even talking about Israel a lot. But I got canceled for talking about it, and they called me an anti-Semite for years. And you begin to notice how they move and how they influence our affairs. They act like we all woke up one day and had this big problem. As you and I, as everyone on this journey understands, it didn't start this way. We have been forced to respond in this way. And anyway, that's that. But I do want to move on. We're going to get into our news. And our first story, we'll talk a little bit about the Gaza peace plan, just so we could get this out of the way. Then we'll talk a little bit about the ADL. And like I said, this is the peace process from actually Monday, which we were not able to cover. I'm sure you all saw it as it happened. On Monday, President Trump unveiled in a press conference with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, his 20-point plan for peace to bring an end to the war in Gaza. Now, this is a peace deal which they had been working on for weeks, and last week Trump said, this is the deal. This is the deal. This is going to be the deal which finally ends the war. And he's been promoting this and talking this up now for 2 weeks, saying any day, 2 weeks, we're finally going to bring it to an end. Okay, well, they presented it on Monday, and it's worth pointing out, this was the Prime Minister's 4th visit to the White House. 4th. He came here in the beginning of February. He came here in the beginning of April. He came here in the beginning of July. And then he came here again at the end of September. That's 4 times in 1 year. That's 4 times in 8 months so far in the second administration, which is crazy to think about. There's no other head of state that has been to America 4 times. I don't think there's been a head of state that's been here more than twice so far this year. In any case, but Netanyahu came here, had a meeting with Trump. They did a press conference and they presented the plan. Very briefly, I'll read through this news story about it from the New York Times. Then we'll talk about where we are in context, where this peace process is, where this peace deal came about, in what context. This is a story from the New York Times that says, quote, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu agreed on Monday to a U.S.-backed deal to end the nearly 2 years of war in Gaza amid a fresh push by President Donald Trump. The initiative agreed to Monday was notable because it appeared to have high-level Israeli buy-in, along with assent from neighboring Arab nations. But it remained unclear whether Hamas would agree to a deal that would lead to its own disarmament and potential exile from Gaza. The deal, which the White House published on Monday, foresees hostilities ceasing immediately and hostages being released within 72 hours of both sides agreeing to the deal. A senior Hamas official told Al Arabi TV, quote, "We do not wish for the war to continue. We will examine any proposal that does not conflict with the interest of the Palestinians." But Netanyahu hedged with details that could make it difficult for Arab nations to sign on. And they always do that, don't they? Pledging to maintain an Israeli security presence inside Gaza for the foreseeable future, the 20-point agreement released by the White House on Monday would pull Israeli forces back from Gaza in phases. Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence with Israel and hand over or destroy their weapons would be given amnesty, and members who choose to leave would be granted safe passage to other countries. There would be a broader effort to demilitarize Gaza. Many of the points in the agreement lack details, potentially giving Israel opportunities to slow or halt the process of handing Gaza back to full Palestinian control. Even as Netanyahu lavished praise on Trump, he peppered his support for the plan with conditions that appeared to aim at addressing his far-right coalition partners who don't want him to stop the war. He said Hamas will be disarmed, Gaza will be demilitarized, Israel will retain security responsibility, Israel will conduct further withdrawals linked to the extent of disarmament and demilitarization, but will remain in the security perimeter for the foreseeable future. He added that if Hamas doesn't agree to the deal, he would escalate Israel's effort to eliminate any possible security threat from Gaza. Now, there's a ton of other details, and we'll work through some of them, but it's important to understand why this deal came about, in what context. We'll set the stage. A lot of people sort of forgot about this or may not be aware of this because it was overshadowed by the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But this huge push from President Trump to bring an end to the war in Gaza started because of Israel's attack on Qatar the day before Charlie Kirk was killed. It was on September 9th, the morning before Charlie Kirk was killed, the day before, that Israel launched an attack, a surprise attack, on the negotiators working for Hamas inside of Qatar. And this was unprecedented, extremely aggressive, and totally infuriated the United States. Qatar is a close U.S. ally under the Trump administration, and they always have been. We have our largest military base in the Middle East in Qatar, and Qatar is the mediator between the United States and Iran, between the United States and Hamas, for that matter, between Israel and Hamas. And that is the source of Qatar's influence in the region, is that they are the go-between. Unlike the Emirates, unlike Saudi Arabia and some of the other Gulf countries, the reason that Qatar is so influential is because they have inroads with the Iranians, but they also have a relationship with the United States, the Gulf countries. And so because they have a balanced foreign policy, that is why they are credible mediators. The nation of Qatar is also made up of a lot of Iranian exiles. There's a major connection there as well. And so Qatar, being in the role as the mediator, of course, has to have safe harbor for the negotiators. Hamas's negotiators are living in Qatar. They couldn't be living in the Gaza Strip because Israel would kill them. Israel would go in and hang them. And so how could they negotiate with this militant faction or its representatives? So Qatar gives them safe harbor to negotiate. 3 weeks ago, almost to the day, Israel went into the Red Sea. They launched missiles over Saudi Arabia's airspace, and they tried to decapitate the Hamas diplomatic team, and they failed. Almost everybody in the Hamas delegation survived. But this infuriated Qatar, the United States, and basically every Muslim country in the region. After the attack, the Arab League and the Organization for Islamic Cooperation got together in a joint meeting, and they were all furious, but they could do nothing against Israel and the United States. And they put out a letter condemning the attack and calling for further integration and cooperation between Muslim and Arab countries. That was the Arab-Muslim reaction. Trump was even more furious because he has connections with Qatar. He visited Qatar. Qatar is a U.S. ally. We're counting on them to sort of work on our behalf, mediating many of these conflicts that Israel's involved in. This happens at the same time that we hear word that the Prime Minister of Israel is going around telling everybody, I control America. I control the United States. I control Donald Trump. Within days of the attack on Qatar, Israel began its invasion of Gaza. And they reworked their plan a bunch of different times, but they moved in on Gaza City, which is the last remaining stronghold of Hamas, they claim. There's still hundreds of thousands of people living there. It's the most major city, and the most major city in the north, which they're trying to empty out of infrastructure and Palestinians. And over the past 2 weeks, the Israeli army has been razing Gaza City to the ground in an effort to push all the Palestinians to the coast and then expel them. So this is the context. This is the context of the Palestinian peace process in the past several weeks. Israel is moving in on Gaza City to expel the Palestinians. They're bombing an American ally. They have turned the entire Middle East against them. Egypt is now calling Israel an enemy. And Egypt is Israel's first treaty ally out of all the Arab Muslim countries. Back in 1979 is when it was signed. So it's in response to these developments that Trump is furious with Netanyahu. And of course, last week, Trump famously said in the press conference, he said, I will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. This is in the middle of the General Assembly in the United Nations, where France, Canada, the United Kingdom, and other countries recognize Palestine. Netanyahu says, we disregard that. We're going to annex the West Bank and Gaza. Trump says last week, I've had enough. Enough with this guy. And he literally used the word. He said, it's enough. It has to stop. I am taking control. I will not allow it. So Trump makes this huge push to finalize the deal. Netanyahu is in America. He's in New York City for the UN. He's got a scheduled trip to the White House on Monday. And this is where Trump gets Netanyahu in the room with Steve Witkoff, his envoy, with Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, with Ron Dermer, Netanyahu's aide, and Netanyahu himself. And Trump says, I want a yes. I don't want a yes, but I don't want a conditional yes. He said, listen, motherfucker, this war is going to end. Enough is enough. I'm the boss, not you. I want you to sign on the dotted line. Now, over the past week, Trump has put together a 21-point plan with the Arab partners, with Egypt, with Jordan, with Turkey, with Qatar, with Saudi Arabia. Trump has put together this deal with backing of all the Muslim countries, all of them. Indonesia, Pakistan, all the important players from the Middle East to Asia, all the Muslim Arab countries are all in on the deal. And Trump calls in Netanyahu and says, this is what it's going to be. Now, originally, this was a 21-point plan. Point number 21 is that Trump wanted Netanyahu to call Qatar and apologize for the attack, which Netanyahu did. And Trump released a photograph of this. Trump is holding the landline handset, and Netanyahu has the phone and is calling up Qatar and apologizing. That's point number 21 crossed off. And Trump forces Netanyahu to agree to the 20-point plan. Brought Netanyahu in himself and said, this is the way it's going to be. All the Muslim countries agree. I'm taking charge on this. That's how it's going to go. Now, what is the general shape of the deal that was presented hours later at the press conference? These are the contours of the deal. It says that Hamas is going to give up all the hostages within 72 hours. It says Hamas is going to lay down their arms, and then they'll be given safe passage to another country. But they have to go. They have to go into exile. Hamas and all the other Palestinian groups will not have any presence in Gaza or have any leadership role in the administration of Gaza in the future. After this is done, the Gaza Strip will be completely demilitarized. There will be no weapons. The Palestinian Authority will not come in. Hamas will not be there. Instead, some kind of Palestinian police force will be created, trained by the Israelis. And Gaza will be put under the control of a technocratic government led by Donald Trump himself and the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Israel, for its part, will withdraw in phases. They're not going to withdraw all at once. They're not going to withdraw fully. They are going to partially withdraw in phases over time. And eventually, when they're completed their withdrawal, they're still going to control a security perimeter within Gaza's borders, spanning the entire border. So in other words, Israel's not leaving the Gaza Strip. They're going to be there permanently. They're going to control the perimeter of Gaza inside of Gaza, probably forever. And because Gaza will be demilitarized, Israel will have security control over the entire thing. What's more, this phased withdrawal is conditioned upon the demilitarization of Gaza. And Israel can veto the withdrawal at any time. In other words, Hamas is being told, lay down your arms and leave. That is without conditions. You must agree to give up your weapons and get out or we'll kill you. If you agree to that, then we're gonna maybe leave in stages, but not fully. And at any time, we could reverse it. At any time, we could stop withdrawing and actually go back in. So that's a pretty raw deal, don't you think? You're being told, give up all your leverage, give up all your hostages, give up your ability to fight back, all your weapons. The leaders and the fighters that are defending the Strip, they got to go too. They have to leave the country and give up their arms or be killed. And in exchange, we're going to partially withdraw over time in phases. We're never fully going to leave. The most you're going to get is that we're only going to control a significant portion of your borderlands, and we're going to have security control over the whole thing. And at any time, we could veto the withdrawal and we could come right back in just as hard and keep doing what we're doing. Sounds like a great deal, right? What's more, the deal contains no provision for an eventual Palestinian state or even Palestinian leadership of Gaza. It says the Palestinian Authority is not going to come in from the West Bank unless they're re-educated. It says Hamas has to go. No other Palestinian group is going to be in charge. There's some vague reference to eventually there'll be a discussion about a Palestinian state, but no details, nothing concrete, no timeline, no nothing. Now, even in a vacuum, this is a raw deal. Even without any context, without knowing any of the facts, this is a pretty rotten deal. Who would agree to this? Unconditional surrender on one side and sort of like conditional withdrawal that could be vetoed at any time on the other. You give up all means of defending yourself, all your fighters and the leaders of the fighters, they got to go. And we might withdraw, but we could decide not to whenever we'd like. We have veto power. And you might get home rule, but that's a discussion for later after we take everything. Not a great deal. But bear in mind, the Israelis always lie. There have been ceasefires. Israel has broken all of them. For example, Israel agreed to a phased withdrawal back in January, a 3-phase deal where Israel would partially withdraw. There would be a 6-week ceasefire in exchange for some of the hostages. Then they would go back to the negotiating table and work out a deal with Hamas that would lead to a permanent end to the fighting and a total permanent withdrawal of Israeli forces. Well, Israel took the 6-week ceasefire. They got $12 billion more from the United States. They got 2,000-pound bombs from the United States. They fortified their military. And then when the 6 weeks was over, they said, yeah, we're canceling the deal. They reimposed the blockade, started bombing again, reinvaded. They lied. They had no intention of following through. They went back on their word. Also, what is the war? This is a war of extermination. What they're doing in Gaza City right now is they're literally razing the city to the ground. It's not like they're going block by block and killing terrorists, which is how they're representing it. They're going block by block, taking the city back from Hamas. No, they're taking control of the city, and the parts they have, they're leveling all the infrastructure with bulldozers. They're bringing in heavy construction equipment, and they're demolishing everything. So clearly their intention is to just take all the land, reset it to zero, declare it as theirs, and then they're going to build a new city there for the Jews. They're going to bring back the settlements. Jewish settlers will plant their flag, and they're just going to call it Israel. That's obviously what they're doing. So think of it. They always go back on their word. They've broken every deal they've ever agreed to. They lie as a point of their policy. And what they're in the process of doing right now is raising the entire territory and planting their flag. And Hamas and the Palestinians are supposed to agree. They're supposed to lay down their weapons and split and trust that Israel will not veto their own partial withdrawal. It makes no sense. Now, what if I told you that those most egregious points of the deal were not part of the deal last week? That conditional withdrawal, partial withdrawal, those were last-minute modifications that Netanyahu insisted upon on Monday. So Trump gets this snake in the White House with the whole team and says, I already have the backing of every Muslim and Arab country. They are all in agreement. Hamas is favorable to this. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, Jordan, Indonesia, Pakistan, everyone agrees. Now you need to sign on the dotted line. Just say yes, no conditions. Well, it's Israel. So of course They could do whatever they want. Netanyahu insists that we include that veto and partial withdrawal, the conditional withdrawal with veto power that is only partial. This is a last-minute modification. Trump doesn't run it by everybody. Qatar finds out about the modification and says, you can't release this. We don't agree. Qatar says this is not the deal we agreed to. This is not what was shown to us. This is not what we conveyed to Hamas, which is happening at the exact same time simultaneously. Qatar says, you can't release the deal. We got to workshop this. This is unacceptable. Trump ignores them and takes it live with the press conference an hour later. Another screw. This is what they do. This is how they operate. And this is all reported, by the way, in Axios. I'll read this article to you. It says, quote, the Gaza peace plan that President Trump presented on Monday contains significant changes requested by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, infuriating Arab officials involved in the negotiations. The deal now before Hamas is significantly different than the one the U.S. and a group of Arab and Muslim countries previously agreed upon due to Netanyahu's intervention. He managed to negotiate several edits into the text, in particular on the conditions and timetable for Israel's withdrawal from Gaza. The new proposal ties Israel's withdrawal to the progress of disarming Hamas and gives Israel a veto over that process. Even if all conditions are met and 3 phases of withdrawal are completed, Israeli forces will still remain within a security perimeter inside Gaza until Gaza is properly secure from any resurgent terror threat, which could be indefinitely. So it's a phased, timed withdrawal. Even when it's completed, it's only partial because they'll still be inside of Gaza. And at any time, Israel can veto this and go back in. Even when all is said and done and it's all finished, they can always change their minds and go back in. That was their last-minute modification. It goes on. It says, officials from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and Turkey were furious over the changes. The Qataris even tried to convince the Trump administration not to release the plan on Monday over those objections. The White House released it anyway and pushed the Arab and Muslim countries to support the plan. And in the end, the Arab and Muslim countries, they did not endorse the plan. They said, well, we welcome the plan. I said, we welcome the plan. This is as good as it's going to get, but they stopped short of fully supporting it. Over and over, this is the same story over and over again. This is the rigmarole when you deal with Israel and the Jews. It's always like this. And what's amazing is that this has been going on for like 80 years. This has been going on since the 1948 ceasefire. It's been going on since the 1967 to 73, no peace but no war. It's been going on since Camp David, since Oslo. This is how they have always been. This is how they always operate. But it is obfuscated by the fact that it's so detailed. In a year, are you going to remember these details? No, and nobody's going to. It's going to fade away into the long history of Israel-Palestinian conflict and negotiations, and Zionist opinion makers, Zionist sources will lie about what happened on Monday. They're going to say Israel offered peace, but they rejected it. And over time, it'll fade away. And people forget that, no, everyone agreed to the peace plan. They changed it last minute. They poison pilled it. Hamas will not agree. And now that's going to justify continuing the war. Hamas can't agree to this deal. The Arabs and Muslims don't agree with this deal. And Netanyahu's going back to Israel. Oh, slipped through our fingers again. Trump tried to nail him down, but he slipped through our fingers again. Now he's back in Israel. And what do you think they're going to do? Well, we already know. After this deal was presented, Israel comes in and they're bombing Gaza harder than ever. They're bulldozing the city. waiting to hear back from the Palestinians. The Palestinians will reject it. All this stuff takes time, and once they do, Netanyahu will see that as a green light to keep pushing their offensive and working towards their ultimate goal, which is to expel all the Palestinians, not to have them live in peace side by side. This is how they operate. And this is why I said last week, Trump says in the press conference, he says, I will not allow them to annex the West Bank. On Monday, he forces Netanyahu to apologize. And of course, Netanyahu did it because these people will say anything. Don't you understand that by now? Saying something and doing something are two completely different things. And here's how I picture that going down. Netanyahu said, if you want me to apologize, I will. All right, you got me. I'll pick up the phone and apologize if that's what it takes to make you happy. But now I want some modifications on the deal, and I won't agree to anything. I'm going to throw the whole thing in the garbage. And Netanyahu picks up the phone and says, oh, I'm so sorry. And it means nothing. They're not sorry. They're not sorry. Yes, Trump made them bend the knee. You need to realize by now, these people are shameless. Bending the knee means nothing. They are intentionally deferential. They give a false deference to this president. They flatter him. They tell him, you're the most pro-Israel president. America's the greatest, because they're without shame. That is how they operate. They will tell you what you want to hear. They will prostrate themselves. They will defer. They talk. Then they go back to Israel and they do whatever the fuck they want, whatever they were going to do before. So you can extract these statements and apologies and commitments and promises, and they may even give you a secret agreement, a secret handshake. They will never honor it because they have no honor. Because they're the only ones that are taking any of this seriously. They are deadly serious about expanding their territory. When they say we will never accept a Palestinian state, they mean it. And what could possibly be the state of affairs other than a dual state? Other than a two-state solution? It said Israel will effectively or legally annex all the territory, either in effect, in reality, or in law, and by name. It doesn't matter. They're going to take it. They're going to take it by force. That's what this war is about. Using October 7th, they got an inch to justify taking miles and miles of territory in Gaza, in the West Bank, in southern Lebanon, in the Golan, in southern Syria, and to launch attacks on all of their enemies. The Houthis, the Shiites, the IRGC, Iran. That's what this is, and they take that very seriously. So these statements they give, like I said, proclamations, commitments, promises, it means nothing. And they've been playing this game throughout this entire war and long before that. They did this with the Biden administration, and I know because I covered the whole thing. They did a ceasefire in late November 2023 and early December. Then they broke it. They made a ceasefire in January 2025. Then they broke it in March of 25. The United States thought that Israel had agreed to a peace proposal last May in 2024 until they just didn't, until Israel just didn't agree to anything. And they left the American president in the previous administration and in this one telling the Washington Post about it, planting stories about how the American president is furious. He had a very mean phone call with Netanyahu. And they say that in private, and in public, they're best friends because the president has no power over Israel. No leverage, no power, no will or no ability to influence that country at all. So this peace proposal that, again, Trump said it, I think, a couple weeks ago. He said, this is the one. We're going to have something in 2 weeks. We're going to get it buttoned up. And he's talking about, we won't allow them to do this. Enough is enough. It's got to stop. Here's the deal. And Hamas will reject it, even if they accepted it. Israel would do what they're going to do regardless. That's your peace process. So that's that. We'll see how this evolves over the next couple of weeks. The next shoe to drop is what's happening in Iran. That's the other fake peace process. So the war in Gaza will continue and the war against Iran will continue, and it will be as if the United States is just not even a party to any of it, because we might as well not be. But that's that. We're going to move on. We're going to talk a little bit also about the ADL and some major breakthroughs on that front, apparently. Today, or I should say this week, it was announced that the ADL is taking down their hate glossary, which is a list that they maintain on their website of who they consider to be hateful organizations and individuals, those that are racist, anti-Semitic, white supremacist, extremist. And at the same time, the FBI announced that they are no longer partnering with the ADL to combat anti-Semitism. This is a story about that from Reuters. It says, quote, the FBI said on Wednesday that it cut ties with the Anti-Defamation League, a Jewish group that tracks anti-Semitism, after conservatives criticized the group for including the slain activist Charlie Kirk's organization in a glossary on extremism. In a social media post, the FBI director, Kash Patel, said the Bureau won't partner with political fronts masquerading as watchdogs. A political front masquerading as a watchdog. Patel's announcement followed criticism of the ADL by right-wing voices, including billionaire Elon Musk, over its inclusion of Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA in their glossary of extremism and hate. After that criticism, the ADL removed the entire glossary from its website. It said that Turning Point USA had a history of bigoted statements, a charge that the group rejects. ADL's website says it works closely with federal, state, and local law enforcement in fighting extremism. It also notes that the FBI had turned to it for data and research as far back as the 1940s. Civil rights advocates criticized Kirk for rhetoric they called racist, anti-immigrant, transphobic, and misogynistic, citing his remarks on Black, LGBTQ+, Muslim, and immigrant communities. So this is a pretty significant development. The ADL is maybe the preeminent Jewish organization that is involved in censorship, reputational destruction, career destruction of those that are considered to be far-right radicals, whether they be Christian radicals, white radicals, anti-Semitic radicals. It is a decidedly left-wing organization. It is a Jewish organization, and it has been engaged in many of these sustained and targeted attacks on right-wing groups and individuals, using the bully pulpit, using censorship, using their connections in Wall Street and in mainstream media to suppress anybody that is outside the mainstream in the right wing. So it is unambiguously a positive development that this group has taken a hit. They're forced to take down their glossary of hate, which was used to debank, censor, and target people that the ADL disagreed with. And they lost their partnership with the FBI, which is massive, because the FBI was basically working on their behalf. The FBI was investigating and, in a sense, persecuting the political opponents of left-wing American Jewry represented by the ADL. And let's just first talk about what the ADL is. Let's just talk about who they are and where they come from. They're called the Anti-Defamation League, which is a bit vague, and a bit strange also. Many groups, they sort of contain the fundamental conceit in their name. The Republican Jewish Coalition, the RJC, is a coalition of Republican Jews. And AIPAC, American Israel Public Affairs Committee, is a public affairs committee that is in favor of the U.S.-Israel relationship. It's right there in the name. Anti-Defamation League. They're a league that is against a defamation. Defamation of who? Defamation in general? Of what? Of who? They were created because of the accusations against an American Jew by the name of Leo Frank, who was accused of raping and murdering a little girl in America. And this is a time of many charges like this against Jews, like the Dreyfus Affair in France, Leo Frank Affair in the United States, where Jews, like blacks and like other minority groups, were being accused of things. And those respective communities claimed that this constituted a defamation. The charges against Jews or blacks or other marginalized groups constituted a form of defamation. That's what they said. I'm not saying that. That's what they said. That's where the name comes from. They said Leo Frank was defamed as a killer, pedophile, rapist because he was Jewish. That was a defamation of Jews as a group because they're marginal. In the same way that blacks are defamed, in the same way that other ethnic, racial, religious minorities were attacked on the basis of their minority status, they're being defamed as criminals, rapists, murderers, whatever. Of course, Leo Frank was most likely guilty, but that is where the name comes from. So the Anti-Defamation League is born, and it is a subsidiary of the B'nai B'rith, which is an international Jewish society. It's a Jewish group. But Jewish is not in the name. It is a Jewish group. And if you read their mission statement, it says that they're dedicated specifically to fighting anti-Semitism, building up the Jewish community, and defending Israel. And they're explicitly born of the international Jewish community, part and parcel of the Jewish community. They're considered a Jewish group and a constituent member of the Organization of Major American Groups. Okay? That's what the ADL is. Now, let's also consider the context. You have a lot of Jews in America. Where did they come from? As we all know, Jews started pouring into America in the late 19th and early 20th century through Ellis Island from Eastern Europe. They were segregated. They were persecuted. There were pogroms in Russia. There was the Pale of Settlement. They were separated from everybody, and they were poor. So they came to America, like the Slavs, like the Southern Europeans. That's where they came from. And during this time, there was a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment. There was a lot of racist sentiment against all the immigrants, against the Jews, against the Italians, against the Irish, against blacks. This era of Jim Crow, this is the era of the Ellis Islanders versus the nativists. And at this time, there was legal discrimination against the Jews. They were kept out of universities with quotas. They were excluded from other organizations, fraternal organizations, other parts of elite society. Why does this matter? Jews were an alien element. They were outsiders. And unlike the Italians or the Irish, they could not assimilate with the native whites because they weren't Christians like them, and they weren't ethnically European like them, or not considered that way. So the Jewish experience in America is that they became very liberal. They come from Russia, and many of them have socialist ideals, progressive, left-wing ideals. They're pro-union. And they're in favor of liberal universalism, the idea that they are just as American as anybody. Because they say that being American is not about being English or Anglo. It's not even about being European. It's not even about being Christian. They start to say that we're as American as anybody, even though we're ethnically and religiously Jewish, because of the values we all share. And that's the real beauty of America. They say the real beauty of America is that we're a rich melting pot where all these people from around the world can come together and we all become part of America with shared values. A Jewish playwright named Israel Zangwill, he came up with that idea. Melting pot comes from him. Those are his words. So as a marginal group facing discrimination, legal and real discrimination, they start to identify as liberal, left-wing, socialist, universalist, and they start to identify with the civil rights cause. And in the 1950s and 1960s, the ADL and other left-wing Jews are leading the charge in the civil rights movement. They're partnering with the NAACP. They're partnering with the black civil rights activists, giving them legal representation, fighting for them in politics. Why? Because these Jewish leftists, these immigrant Jewish communities, they understand that a rising tide lifts all boats. In other words, the more civil rights, the more liberal, the more multicultural that America gets, the better it is for them. If the legal standard is that there's no discrimination, no racism, if race is not even part of our society, then that's really good for them because it allows them to ascend. No quotas at Harvard, no quotas at General Electric, no quotas or restrictions at the country club. It gives them more opportunities, more rights, more access. So they find a common cause with immigrants in general, with American blacks, with even Muslims for that matter later on, with all these other communities. That's why Jews are so left. That's why like 80% of American Jews are left. That's why Jews are behind so many of the left-wing causes. Whether it's women's rights, civil rights, gay rights, that's why and there's other reasons too, but that is a big reason why they're behind a lot of it. Because liberal universalism is essential to them having privileges and opportunities and rights in America. They have this political interest in redefining what America is. And that's where the ADL comes from. Now, in 2015, the ADL gets a new president, Jonathan Greenblatt. He's from the Obama administration. But as we know, the Obama administration is very progressive. And it's made up of these really militant progressives from the 60s and 70s. These guys are communists. They're from Nation of Islam. They're black nationalists. Many of them believe in liberation theology. They're radical communists. And around the same time, in the 60s and 70s, the international left starts to see Israel as a racist state. They start to see Israel, to the extent that it was aligning with the United States, as capitalist, because it was becoming capitalist, as racist, as nationalist. And so these radical progressives, even many of them Jews, start to hate on Israel. An Obama admin official becomes part of the ADL in 2015. And all of a sudden, the ADL is perceived by many pro-Israel Jews as getting too close to this progressive left that hates Israel. The ADL forgives Ilhan Omar for saying it's all about the Benjamins. The ADL under Greenblatt is very tight with the Democratic Party, which is being run by Obama and all of his people, who the pro-Israel Jews in America consider to be Israel haters. They think that Obama is a Jew hater. They think Obama's an Israel hater. They think that the United Nations is out to get Israel. Amnesty International's out to get Israel. They think that the far left, the progressives, are out to get Israel. And they say the radical left has taken over the Democratic Party. And so there begins to be this within Jewish battle between the pro-Israel Jews and the ADL. And you see this all over the place. Ben Shapiro hates Greenblatt and what the ADL has become. You have people like Joel Pollack, the editor at Breitbart. He says the same thing. You've got Ezra Levant. He was on InfoWars today, said if all the Jews were like the ADL and Shmuley, I would hate the Jews too because they're so left-wing. But let's think about this for a second. Why do we oppose the ADL? Why do we oppose the Jewish left? We oppose the ADL and the Jewish left because we believe that America is particular. It's not a melting pot. That's not what makes America great. We believe that America has a distinct identity rooted in its European heritage, that it's white, that it's Christian. And our American culture proceeds from our Christian heritage and our European heritage, and in some sense, our European genetics. So we believe that that's what America is. And to the extent that Jews come here and they're not the same racially. They don't share our religion. In many ways, they don't share the same values. They're like socialists and communists. We're saying, no, you can't redefine what America is. You can't come here and tell us what our country is. Our country is one thing, and you can try and force yourself into it, but you're never going to change what America is. This is the tension between the white right and the ADL, the Christian identity movement and the ADL. This is why the ADL hates the far right, because the far right, to the extent that it's made up of traditionalists, traditional Christians, traditional Americans, white identitarians, we're trying to preserve America. And we're saying that what America is white and Christian. And the ADL, to the extent that they're an advocate for the Jews and the marginalized immigrant Jews and all the other marginalized racial, ethnic, religious minorities, the ADL is saying, no, that's an extremist viewpoint. America's for everybody. It's not just for whites. It was never for whites. It's not just for Christians. It's for everybody. And this is why the ADL is working to make America less white and less Christian. Because the less white and less Christian it is, the weaker that claim will become that America is or should be or ever was white and Christian. This is why the ADL is set against the far right. And that's why the ADL is branding white identitarians, Christian nationalists, and critics of Israel as hateful, fanatics, extremists, and is seeking to get them censored and banned and destroyed and their reputations and lives ruined. That is our opposition to the ADL. That's why the ADL considers us to be beyond the pale. Because for 100 years, they have been advocates for a multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic, religiously pluralistic American society on behalf of the immigrant Jews, on behalf of the eternal wanderers, those that are not assimilable. And to the extent that they're speaking on behalf of blacks and Muslims and gays and women, it's again because a rising tide lifts all boats. They want to push back in as broad a possible way a united front against the dominant white Christian majority, which has the ability to keep all those groups down. But here's the rub. So the ADL is kicked out of the FBI, and they're forced to destroy their hate glossary. But this development is being celebrated by Jews. I'll give you a quick list of them. A group called Beitar USA celebrated the announcement. This was their tweet about it. They said, quote, "Today we note with satisfaction that the ADL has removed its so-called glossary of hate, which listed Beitar as the only Jewish radical extremist hate group. We were placed alongside groups like Turning Point and others, a company that further exposed the ADL's bias. It is shameful and reprehensible that the ADL ever labeled Beitar, one of the world's leading Zionist movements, a hate organization. In truth, the ADL is a radical left-wing woke organization that opposes strong Zionism and fuels division and hate in America and worldwide. We agree with Elon Musk. The ADL is a hate group. At the World Zionist Congress, we will advance resolutions to formally declare the ADL a radical hate group hostile to the state of Israel. Founded by Zeev Jabotinsky in 1923, Beitar has stood proudly for Jewish pride, Zionism, and self-defense for more than a century." So how do you explain this then? The ADL is a Jewish group in defense of the Jews against defamation, legal restrictions, quotas, etc. But other Jewish groups are calling the ADL anti-Israel, hostile to Israel, labeling Israeli Jewish groups as hateful. How do you make sense of this? Well, it basically comes from within the Jewish community, two ideas of how the Jews are going to survive in a world that hates them. And that's their perception. Two competing ideas. There are Jews in America that say, look, we like America. We want to live in America. We want to live in Europe. And yeah, we want to live in Israel too. And in order for the world to be safe for Jews, we need the whole world to embrace this liberal universalist ideology. How can we inoculate the world against anti-Semitism? What's the solution to the Jewish question? We have to make the whole world post-racial, liberal, religiously tolerant, because if the whole world, led by the United States, shares these global values, then we will be safe, we can ascend, we can protect ourselves through the legal process. That is how we can be safe. But the Zionists, in particular the religious Zionists, the revisionist Zionists, they have an altogether different opinion. They have a very skeptical view of the world. They say the world is always going to hate us. Any liberal consensus is only short-lived. Eventually, on a long enough timeline, they're going to try and kill us again or persecute us again. They believe the only way for Jews to be safe is for them to have a strong country, for them to have their own country in the Middle East, for them to have nuclear weapons, a powerful military, a big, in terms of population and landmass, a big, strong, powerful country, a country defined as a Jewish nation, an ethno-state, a country of, by, for Jews, a powerful country. And that's the only way we're ever going to be safe, is to be nationalistic and muscular. Now, you are starting maybe to see the tension because there's a contradiction. They can't really do both. Because in order for Israel to be strong and powerful, they have to embrace a particular Jewish identity to the exclusion of all the others. The Israeli government has to say, this is a place for Jews, only for Jews. This is a Jewish nation. It's not a liberal nation for everybody. It's a nation for Jews, by Jews, for Jews, Jewish values, ethnic Jews. That's who it's for. And we're going to kick everybody else out. And if you're not on board with that, we're going to kick you out. And we're going to violently and aggressively pursue our interests, like in the West Bank, like in Gaza. We're going to push you out. We're going to take more land. We're going to bomb our neighbors. We're going to make you submit to us. Meanwhile, in America, the ADL is saying America's for everybody. America's liberal. We don't agree with the particularism like that. We don't agree with ethno-nationalism. There's this tension. And that is why many of these pro-Israel groups are so happy the ADL is receding. That's why they're calling them woke, because in their own words, they say the ADL is hurting strong Zionism. And why do you think that is? It's because the American left and even the European left, they're backing the Israeli left. The Israeli left that wants to make Israel left-wing like America, liberal like America. It's a division that runs through American Jewry and Israel also. And there's even a big debate about this in a forum for Jewish organizations. This is a story from the Times of Israel in 2018. It says, quote, last year, the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations updated its secret rules to ban insults, ad hominem attacks, and name-calling among member organizations and instituted a special committee to consider complaints in strictest confidence. The committee met to hear complaints. All parties agreed. The session, all parties agreed, devolved into insults, attacks, name-calling. 3 U.S. Jewish organizations, the National Council of Jewish Women, the ADL, and the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, accused the Zionist Organization of America of inappropriately criticizing them. The ZOA filed complaints against member groups that have yet to be scheduled for hearings. The complaints range from differences about who is responsible for anti-Zionist signs at rallies to intimations of corrupt intent to allegations of violence. Jewish politics is nasty, but rarely is the infighting in public. The charges and countercharges demonstrate the ways that ZOA President Morton Klein gets under his colleague's skin. So you have 3 liberal Jewish organizations, the Organization for Jewish Women, the ADL, and the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, fighting with the Zionist Organization of America. And the basis of the fight is that the liberal Jewish organizations are soft on progressives that hate Israel. And they're too tough on pro-Israel groups that they call racist or nationalistic or xenophobic. The pro-Israel right wing in America and in Israel hates the American Jewish left because they say that the Jewish left is not pro-Israel enough. They don't recognize the threat the Palestinians pose to Israel. They're trying to destroy Israel by opening up Israeli society to Arabs, Muslims, and foreigners. And that is the basis of the tension within Jewish politics. And they're talking about this openly. Ben Shapiro has said, my problem with the ADL is that it's become a partisan left-wing group, inhospitable to Jew haters like Ilhan Omar, and too tough on pro-Israel guys like myself, Shapiro says. Joel Pollack said, the ADL used to be good, but now they're calling everybody that's right-wing anti-Israel, and they're failing to isolate the real haters of Israel, like Nick Fuentes, like all these other guys. So in other words, let's summarize here. We, the white right, those that are in favor of a white America, we, the Christian nationalist movement that's in favor of a Christian country, Christian values, we are Christian, those that are critical of Israel's influence in politics, we are against the ADL because the ADL, as a pro-Jewish group, is trying to redefine American identity to make it safer and more hospitable for their own group, and because they represent Israel influencing our country. And on that basis, they're censoring, suppressing, fighting against traditional Americans, traditional white America, Christian America, independent from Israel. But these people like Ezra Levant, Ben Shapiro, Mort Klein, they hate the ADL because they say the ADL is too friendly to the new anti-Semites on the far left and too critical of the most extreme right-wing Israelis and the Netanyahu government in Israel. So our criticisms of the ADL and the right wing of American Jewry, their criticism of the ADL are two different things. Now, why does this matter? Because the ADL is not going to be vanquished here. What is most likely going to happen is that Jonathan Greenblatt will be fired and replaced with a more pro-Israel president. I'm sure that the constituent members of the ADL's board or its donors, they're going to say, look, you're ruining the ADL. The ADL used to be all powerful. You're ruining it. We need to get somebody in that's not a leftist, that's not from the Obama admin, that's not with the institutional left wing in America. So that might be one of the things that happens. The other thing that has already happened is that the ADL is being replaced with a different species of Jewish organization. What are they? I'll give you examples. Beitar is one of them. Beitar was founded by Zeev Jabotinsky, and Beitar has been working with the U.S. State Department. This is a Jewish group born in Israel. They were terrorists in the pre-Israeli independence mandate of Palestine. They're working with the U.S. State Department to make lists of anti-Israel college students to be deported. So you get 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You get the ADL working with the FBI, or you get Beitar working with the State Department. You get the ADL directing the FBI to attack white supremacists and racists, or you get Beitar to direct the State Department to deport the pro-Palestine guys, the Muslims. Canary Mission is another. Canary Mission creates lists of students that have protested Israel in favor of Palestine. They're running those names up the flagpole to get them deported. Canary Mission is an Israeli outfit. Beitar is an Israeli outfit. They have a line to Marco Rubio because Rubio is supported by pro-Israel Jews like Miriam Adelson, who's in bed with the Republican Party. It's a different faction. Now, I would say that on net, it is probably a good development. Kicking out the ADL, look, the ADL was suppressing white nationalists, white identity, Christian nationalism, the far right. They were doing that in an ideologically liberal way because they're part of the American left. These right-wing Zionist organizations, they're really going in more on the third worldists, the Muslims, the progressives, the far left, that is specifically hating on Israel. The far right sometimes hates on Israel. A lot of the far right is quietist about Israel. Guys like Jared Taylor, Peter Brimelow, they don't talk about Israel. The Bronze Age Pervert Network, they're sort of white nationalist, but pro-Israel. So groups like Beitar and Canary Mission are going to leave those guys alone. Now, it's then a question of, is it better to have the ADL target Israel critics and the entire far right, or Israeli organizations that are going to leave the far right alone and only go after the Israel critics on the far right and on the far left? That's an open question. Is it better? I think in some sense. In another sense, it only makes them more precise. And that's where we need to be careful. Because what they really want is for the ADL to become more precise and only attack the true adversaries of Israel. And I don't know that that's a good thing. There's a consensus right now that wokeism is bad. It's gone too far. There's a consensus now that immigration needs to stop. Blacks are out of control. There's a consensus. All this left-wing stuff has gone too far. Even that Israel's gone too far. And there's a general climate of free speech. Now, if the ADL is reorganized and they become more precise and they say, you know what, you're right, we went too far. Turning Point's not anti-Semitic. They're not haters. But if they say Nick Fuentes is, and that guy's got to go, then there might be a new consensus that isolates the only people that are actually against Israel. And you have a general climate of free speech that very quickly becomes a little less general. And people think we have free speech, but in reality, the so-called real anti-Semites are being precisely targeted with laser precision, and they're being punished. And no one's going to talk about it because they'll say, yeah, well, the ADL used to go too far. Now they're focusing on the right guys, and that's a good thing. And mark my words, that's what Shapiro, Pollack, that's what they're all saying. They're saying we're not against the ADL censoring people. Even Kash Patel. Kash Patel said they're political, masquerading as a watchdog group. And inside of that is a tacit statement that watchdog organizations are necessary, that we need Jewish watchdogs, but this isn't one of them. Or if it is, it's a bad one. So these are the nuances, okay? And a lot of people tell you the Jews are not a monolith. That's true. But one thing they're monolithic about is they're all in favor of their own collective interest ahead of ours. So they have these disputes, but they keep them in the family. At the end of the day, they literally all get together at conferences. They literally all get together at international congresses and conventions and conferences, and they debate what is good for us. How are we going to fight for our interest? How are we going to fight for what's best for Israel, what's best for Jews? And if that's the question you're asking, then you really shouldn't have power over Americans, because the only people that should have power over Americans are people that are saying what's best for Americans. And maybe the Jews can have a say. Maybe the Jews can petition the American government and say, hey, this is making us uncomfortable. I think that's their right. They're human beings like us, and they exist in America, and they're not going anywhere, and they exist in Israel, but they cannot have that final say. They cannot have that authority. They have too much power. That's my problem. They have too much power. We need to take the power from them. And it doesn't mean we're going to hurt them. It doesn't mean we're going to be cruel towards them. It doesn't even mean we're not going to listen to them. But it means they just can't have that final say. They can petition for their grievances like every other minority group, like every other special interest. Special interests have a place in America. We want to hear from, let's say, black people. Black people are a distinct part of America. They're distinct from the rest. So are the Jews. So are, in a sense, Catholics. They should petition an all-American, all-Christian government about their grievances. They should not have the veto power over who gets a Twitter account, who gets to exercise their right to speak freely, who gets to hold or run for office, and all the rest of it. So, anyway. So, 2 cheers for the ADL's disempowerment. It is unambiguously, in my opinion, a good thing, but mixed feelings about it. You should see it as a red flag that pro-Israel guys are cheering this on, because it only means they're going to get replaced by a pro-Israel group as opposed to a Jewish leftist group. But they're not that different. All right. With that being said, we're going to move on. We're going to take a look at our super chats. We'll see what you guys have to say about all this.
All right, so let's get into this review. A lot of takeaways from this. And, I mean, the situations or the stories continue to be about Israel, continue to be about Israel's influence, whether it's Jewish, American, whether it's Israel. Do we lump everybody together? Do we separate everybody? Even when we talk about what Tucker Carlson was discussing and Jeffrey Sachs and a lot of other people, even with Candace Owens, I don't think that you can separate things. Of course you can, but perhaps what I'm saying is I don't think that we should be separating things in this regard. Because what ends up happening, and I may be wrong on this, and excuse me, I wrote a bunch of notes, so I want to make sure that I'm, making sure that I'm talking about covering everything. But you know what tends to happen, in my opinion? We're so scared and fearful to talk about certain things, so we have to pinpoint with such accuracy. But then on the other end, when Netanyahu is running around saying that he's doing things on behalf of Judaism and he's the prime minister of the only Jewish state, where's that energy from Jewish people criticizing Netanyahu from lumping everybody in the same category? Generalizations seem to be very hard for certain types of people to deal with. People that are victims, people that are insecure, people that feel that they're being targeted, right? Because they don't want to accept the responsibility or accept that what actually is being said may be true. So let me give you an example of this. There are certain generalizations that may be made about black men. I don't take offense to them. I actually make certain generalizations about black men all the time. Certain things that I don't feel that I fall in that category. So therefore, if it doesn't apply to me, I do not take offense. It doesn't trigger me. Matter of fact, the things that do tend to trigger me, if I'm being totally honest, are the things that I actually do fall in the category based on whatever that person is discussing. If they're making a generalization about somebody and I feel emotionally engaged or triggered by it, chances are that's because it actually does apply to me. On one end, we want to talk about AIPAC as if, oh, it has nothing to do with Israel, right? Okay. So if you just look at AIPAC and you're disconnecting or separating the connection, let me wait for this. Wait for that ambulance to go by. But if it is separated, then that means that we can't say Israel, we'd have to say Jewish Americans. I'm over here like, yo, are they targeting me because of the conversation that I'm having with all this noise? But this is just how my street is. So when we think about somebody like the AIPAC and we're getting ready to talk about the ADL, it always seems like the most sensitive people, the people that are most insecure, they have the problem with generalizations. It's almost like I couldn't imagine being on a football team and the coach saying, let's say after a game, we played bad. Hey, man, we're going to have to run on Monday because we didn't go out there with much effort. We weren't disciplined. We had a bunch of penalties. Like I said, the effort wasn't there. We didn't play hard. It seemed like we just didn't show up. We weren't in the game. We got tired. We weren't, whatever. And I raised my hand and said, oh, not me. The people that are going to be sitting in that room feeling the most uncomfortable are the ones that it actually applies to. If I had a great game and I know that I won 100, not only am I not going to be feeling that way, but I'm also going to be pissed off, just like the coaches at the rest of my teammates, that I showed up, went hard, was focused, was disciplined, had proper preparation, and everybody else didn't. I'm not going to take offense to what coach is saying because I'm probably seeing the very same thing. So this is what I don't understand, and this is where a lot of the inconsistency for me comes into play with a lot of Jewish Americans. And another thing, so I'm going through all of this, And I started to look at, and I'm going to bounce around a little bit, go back and forth between the ADL, Tucker's conversation. Try to bear with me. I remember seeing a graphic. The graphic, I just had it pulled up. I remember seeing this graphic of median household income in the United States. I don't know if it's going to show clearly, but I remember discussing this graphic years ago on the show, and it always comes up from time to time, and it's the median household income in the United States by ethnic group. And it always stood out to me that Jewish Americans weren't on here. You have Indian Americans, Filipino, Taiwanese, Sri Lankan, Japanese, Malaysian, Chinese, Pakistani, white, Korean, Indonesian. The average American, that's just all Americans. Thai Americans, Bangladeshi, Nepali, Hispanic, and of course at the bottom, African Americans. I'm not gonna go where I was gonna go. I'm gonna stay focused. It always stood out to me that Jewish Americans weren't here because I'm like, damn, like, are you an ethnicity? Are you a race? Are you a religion? What is it? And it seems to be you pick and choose whichever conveniently applies to put you in the most favorable position at that time, if I'm being totally honest. That's what tends to happen. And then when I look at a list like this, and I remember, and I'm going all over the place, because with the ADL, I started to look up. I said, weren't there some instances which the ADL called out like Jay-Z and LeBron for different lyrics? And I remember, I think I had it on here somewhere. If I don't have it, then I remember it. In 2018, I think it was, LeBron James said something, or he was repeating like a 21 Savage line, and it was that I'm getting that Jewish money in a favorable way. Like, hey, I'm getting to this Jewish money, right? I'm making a lot of money. And the ADL came out and had a problem with that. And I was sitting here, I'm like, wait, like who, like, one, it's true. Jewish people are successful when it comes to finances, right? It just is what it is. And a lot of other thoughts were going through my head, especially with Leor Cohen and the influence of a lot of Jewish people in the record industry. But I'm putting that all to the side for this particular argument because I don't want, or engagement, because I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent. But here I am, I'm sitting here like, damn, they're getting mad at LeBron for saying this? And I'm like, are you mad that he's just pointing out your success? Is that anti-Semitic, or is that just you're worried about, hold on, you're worried that based on your history, that has been something that some people have said and hated on it to the point where they've expelled you. Maybe you blame that being the reason for the Holocaust, all these different things. But just because that happened, that gives you the right to now condemn something that somebody said that's true. It's like, how can I put it? Like, we had these, I don't even want to get into what I was getting ready to say. Let me just stay on point. But there seems to be an extreme level of sensitivity. And I can understand if they do attribute these type of things being said to certain challenges and destruction that you fought in the past. But what bothers me is, like, how are the most sensitive people so insensitive to other people when it comes up to in different situations? Let's say like Palestine right now. I would think that the most sensitive group of people that went through the Holocaust, that wants to make sure that these things never happen again, to the point where LeBron James can't give you a compliment or can't say 21 Savage's lyric that is factual. Not a stereotype that's not true. There's some stereotypes that aren't true. Let's be honest, Jewish people get a lot of money. Matter of fact, I just looked up the annual household income, median household income for US adults, Jewish adults. Do you know what it is? $140,000. It says the national median is $74,000. And this actual one says for the average American specifically is $56,000. So you're damn near tripling the average American. I don't even want to reference it to, I mean, you're tripling, well, not I shouldn't say tripling.
but you've doubled white Americans. You're doing exceptionally well to the point where this says that Indian Americans are 100,000, but I believe that was a bit delayed because it says that Jewish people only come second that they're either first or second, depending on the polls, where it has Jewish people at 140,000 and Hindus sometimes are a little bit slightly more or right under. I think it says Hindus are, one says 140,000, the other says 147 or 155. This is where my mind starts to think, and this is also where if you don't look into this type of stuff, it may go over your head. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that I'm also aware of the fact that before Biden left office, and Trump didn't have an issue with this, and it always stood out to me, Trump, who was so against certain DEI things when it comes to black people and migrants, whoever, but specifically when it comes to black people, because I think black Americans are in a different category than illegal migrants. I just think that it's different. Joe Biden added Jewish people to the minority-owned business. So I'm not sure if y'all are familiar. Let me actually look it up. Well, let me explain it, and then I'll look it up if y'all need a particular definition of exactly what it is. But there's certain advantages that minority-owned businesses get, right? If your business is minority-owned. There's women's, and then there's certain ones by race. And I believe Asians have one. I'm not sure exactly which group of Asians. Native Americans, perhaps it's Native Americans. Perhaps that's the one that I'm referencing. And there's one with black people. But Joe Biden, before he left, he actually put one in for Jewish people. So I'm sitting here and I'm looking at these DEI principles that Trump can't stand, and he always calls out when it comes to black people about it being very unfair to white Americans and all this other stuff that he'll say on it. But then you'll give Jewish people a business advantage, people that are already at the top of the list, but you have a problem with giving black people DEI for certain things, and they're at the bottom making $35,000 their median income, and Jewish people is $140,000. So I'm just asking, what's the point of it? And let me be very clear. I don't rock with DEI, but I don't rock with DEI because I don't like the results that it brings. I think it cripples black people. I think it makes us victims. I think that it brings out all the qualities that are needed to keep us exactly in the position that we are in, while everybody else grows and embraces a certain sense of responsibility and onus on themselves. So they're growing while we're staying stagnant, which ultimately means we're falling more and more behind. Sorry, I got the sniffles. So I just started to wonder, wait, why does it make sense to give Jewish people, or to categorize Jewish people in this, and give Jewish people this minority-owned business advantage? I just didn't understand it. Maybe y'all can explain it to me more. Let me actually look it up. Joe Biden, Jewish people, minority-owned business. Let me look it up real quick. Sorry, man, these sniffles are crazy. So the U.S. Department of Commerce will now consider Jewish-owned entities as minority business enterprises in federal programs. This is considered a significant change in policy, giving Jewish entrepreneurs access to benefits many minority businesses already enjoy. Why? You're European. What's the minority? Didn't Europeans come over here and conquer America? Like, are Italians going to be putting that? Are Irish people going to be putting that? I don't understand. Is it an ethnicity? Is it a religion? It seems to be that people pick and choose based on what's in their financial interest at that particular time, and the energy just doesn't seem consistent. I would ask, what is the point of this? It says the agreement aims to allow Jewish-owned businesses to access federal contracts, grants, and capital that were largely restricted to recognized minority groups until now. Let me read that again. The agreement aims to allow Jewish-owned businesses to access federal contracts, grants, and capital that were largely restricted to recognized minority groups until now. Are we talking about Jewish people when they say opportunities that were largely restricted to recognized minority groups until now? Who are we talking about? Who are we talking about, right? So now we're taking opportunities away possibly from other people or filling slots because we're obviously including, let's not play dumb. If we're including another group, then obviously that opens it up to another group and may take certain opportunities away from another group. Why are we doing that? Jewish people have been extremely successful in America. I don't understand the point of this. It's just another example to me of why AIPAC and the ADL get the type of criticism that they get. Their influence is too strong. Here you are, one of the most successful groups in the country, and you're trying to be classified as a minority-owned business, so therefore you can get access to federal contracts, grants, and capital that were largely restricted to recognize minority groups until now. So pretty much you've had the same struggle as I've had, right? We're all the same. We're all the same minority. You're a minority, I'm a minority, same thing. Let's lump us in the same category. If I don't embrace that victimhood mindset, and I have had a black business for over 10 years, maybe longer than that, 15 years, probably closer to. I'm not on this list. Maybe I should be, though. Maybe I should. I'm not nothing that I'm proud of. I just never have done it. Maybe I should take some advice from the people who are winning. I'm very aware of, I'm very aware of my biases, right? And it allows me, when I drop my bias, to look at things full scope and just evaluate it for what it is. And I don't understand this. I don't understand this. And let me go back to my notes because I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent. But I don't understand this. What's the point of it? Somebody explain to me what's the point of this. And going back to Tucker, going back to Jeffrey Sachs, going back to Marjorie Taylor Greene, it does seem to be very controlled opposition. This is what Nick Fuentes is always talking about. You're so scared, you gotta say, well, I'm just talking about Israel. I'm not talking about Jewish people. Netanyahu doesn't walk on those same eggshells when he says, oh, I'm just talking about Israel. He doesn't say he's just talking about Israel. And Nick pointed this out, this FUBU mentality, for us, by us. And we're not talking about Israel when Israel embraces this for us, by us mindset. They're talking about Jewish people, and that is what has established them as a powerhouse, if we're being honest. That is what has established them as a powerhouse. Not just Israel standing on its own 2 feet, no. The relationship that they have with Jewish people, obviously in America and throughout the world in a lot of ways. People need to start calling stuff out as direct and intentional as possible, in my opinion. And we need to be able to have real conversations. Because if we can't have real conversations about this stuff, I don't think that we're ever going to get to a point where, well, maybe the goal isn't to get to a point. I was getting ready to say to a greater peace, humanity, working together and living in harmony. Maybe that's not the goal. Maybe that's not the goal. Because when I'm looking at certain things occurring, it seems as if the more I pay attention and the more I learn, that it's very clear that everybody doesn't have that mindset. There's certain people that are so insecure and so fearful in this world that they will do any and everything to give themselves an opportunity and their group an opportunity, even if that means unfairly, let's say, taking away an opportunity from somebody else. And let me be clear, like I said, you can remove all the minority-owned stuff, to be totally honest. All these welfare, these social programs, you can remove all of them. I told y'all I don't embrace the DEI just because I don't think that it works. I think it's a game. I think it's a manipulation that people have used for black people, in my opinion. It's a way for the government to play daddy in black households rather than daddy actually being dad. My boy lucked out. People are scary, man. People are scary, and I think Tucker is being very strategic with his approach and doesn't want to say certain things, even though he's clearly saying it. He'll say certain things and then deny it being exactly what it is, and we can clearly see it. It just is what it is. So I'm not as familiar with people when Nick was talking about how a lot of Israeli people or Jewish people are celebrating Jonathan Greenblatt getting up out of there, but one thing that I will say is that I remember Jonathan Greenblatt, there's a popular video in which he's discussing we, and it's like he forgot that he actually runs an American organization, or what I thought was an American organization. And then he's talking about Israel. So you miss me with all the BS. I'm just over all the games being played, all the fear having us. You know, it's like you walk in a room and because everybody who's in power says that the sky's red or the sky's purple, green, I gotta say the sky's purple and green. No, the sky's blue. It is what it is. I don't care what comes with it. When you allow people to move with such privilege and to get away with certain things that everybody else wouldn't get away with, and those are the chosen people, and those are this and that, you end up creating a mindset in them that's very harmful. Just like it's twofold, right? Yes, it impacts the people that may be oppressed or losing opportunities, but it also creates a very bad mindset, victimhood that the other people can embrace. Because they think they're privileged. They think they're entitled to certain things that they're not. And then they commit atrocities based on this entitlement that everybody has always allowed them to embrace and to get away with. Anything close to a Holocaust is, oh my God, we gotta step in. But then you can't, like people that are so sensitive about a Holocaust, you can't have any sympathy and empathy for the Palestinians that you're actually going about committing what I would call genocide now. So I don't know. Y'all take it or leave it. It is what it is. These are just some of the thoughts that come to mind when we have these topics or discuss these topics. He said, Nick said a couple different things that I wanted to include, but I think we pretty much touched on everything. I think this is a question that I also want to leave you all with. How will Jews survive in a place when they're not embraced? It's going to be interesting times that we're getting into, because now is probably the time where the overall opinion on Israel, of course, but then overall with Jewish people as well, is at an all-time low, perhaps maybe since the Holocaust. I don't know. And I don't like that. I don't like that for my Jewish brothers and sisters. And I don't like that for the reasons why it's like that, for the atrocities that are being committed while a lot of people sit in silence and act like they're not complicit in it. So I won't be that. I won't be the person that's complicit in it. So y'all take it how y'all want to take it. Y'all make sure y'all keep tapping in, keep rocking with us. We're gonna keep these videos coming, keep speaking our mind, because that's one thing that we can never allow people to take away from us. You heard Bibi Netanyahu talk about how important it is when it comes to influence, social media, and spreading certain messages. and most importantly, being informed, because if not, then they're gonna push propaganda to us and have us all misled. So on that note, I'll let y'all go. All right, I'll see y'all soon. Appreciate y'all. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. Let me know where I may be off, because I'm totally open to I may be completely wrong on this. So inform me. I got great intentions, and I'll show you by if somebody presents something to me that I can learn from, I'm glad to accept, glad to process, and glad to make certain changes. I'll see y'all soon. Ew.
It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there.